The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get stinko.
This is the Giles and the Goalie podcast as part of the Zone Coverage Podcast Network. With your hosts, Giles Farrell and Ben Remington.
Welcome to the Giles and the Goalie podcast. I am your host, Giles Farrell. Over there somewhere is Ben Remington.
Hello.
And joining Ben and myself today on the podcast is our friend and a returning guest to the show. He can be found at the Athletic Minnesota and on his podcast at Locked on Wild. He is Tony Abbott.
Hey, how's it going, guys? Oh, just bunkering in my basement and watching wrestling again. Speaking of wrestling, I really enjoy that Joe comes on to be the face and do the 10 best Wild players in team history and start to step on your introduction. But I am honored that you guys see me as the heel out of the Joe and Tony tag team.
Ben made that decision. I didn't. I washed my hands.
Oh, yeah, just straight under the bus. No, I thought it was a good fit. I honestly did. Like, Joe has been a super huge Wild fan since day one. And he's a little bit more of a cheerful kind of bubbly personality, where Tony, you call it like it is. So we need someone who calls them like they sees them. And that's what this episode is all about. Do I need to cut a promo against Joe now? Is that how this works? No, but that would be some interesting beef if the hosts of a near daily podcast beefed. I don't know how long you guys can go on with that. Listen here, brother, you couldn't even sanitize my microphone.
Yeah, we're basically just trying to get you to split up.
Yeah, we're just trying to create drama. Drama, controversy creates cash, as Eric Bischoff of WCW Nitro said. Yeah. Honestly, like there's nothing that works for ratings like an old-fashioned beef. So I'm looking forward to beefing with Joe.
Yeah, and the Wild aren't playing right now, and usually at this time of year, Wild Twitter is turned upside down, arguing with each other. So we have to try and recreate some drama.
There really has been no beefing. You would think, because it goes either one of two ways, right? Everybody packs it in because there's no hockey, or there's just beefing because there's nothing left to do but beef. I have seen no beefing on Wild Twitter, and it's frankly embarrassing. I think that's what happens when you have a very odd ending to the season like we had, where you have wasn't any closure whatsoever, good or bad. So I think that people just don't know what to think. Like, this very much could have been a playoff team, as a lot of projections are showing. And I believe it's was it Dom Lucian that's doing it for the Athletic, that's doing a season projection. And the Wild make the playoffs, and so it's kind of Wild fans are kind of in a weird spot where they don't really know if their team is a playoff team or not. They don't really know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, and we don't really get to find out either way for quite some time, if ever. Well, now that I think about it, there aren't really that many divisive players on the Wild right now. Everyone is more or less in agreement on, I would say, most of the roster. Even some of the guys who are the usual punching bags, like Mikko Koivu, he's aged to the point where his production's gone down enough so that even if you're a big Mikko guy, you're not really defending his play right now. With Devin Dubnyk, I'm certainly somebody who says hey, look at, what Devin Dubnyk's gone through this year, and that has to be affecting his play. But, I'm not going to defend his play. And I don't know, is there really a divisive guy on the Wild right now? Well, lots of people absolutely positively despise Ryan Suter for some reason. So there's that. But yeah, that's about it. Yeah, it's just like it's not hot, it's not popping like it was when we had Dumba coming up and Dumba was dividing the people, or even like Fiala. Like it started to be that way earlier this season, Fiala, but he got too good. He got too good to be a contested player.
Yeah, no, that helps a lot when you go on a tear like Fiala went.
Yeah, October through mid-January, Fiala. That was a decisive topic. But then, since then, he was too good.
He's just been the best player in the NHL, a Hart Trophy winner in my mind.
Yeah, that'll fix a lot of things.
Before we dive into our list of the 10 worst players in Minnesota Wild history, I gotta ask, Tony, how are you dealing with staying isolated?
Oh, it sucks. Like, I'm not gonna lie. I don't know if I'm like dealing with it particularly well. Just playing video games, catching up on like chores and housework and stuff like that you don't get to, when you're doing things like having a job and doing doing your life as usual. So I've had more time to take care of some stuff, but in general, like I think that you guys are the first people that I've talked to that wasn't my wife or Joe. And like, don't get me wrong, I love my wife and Joe, even though I'm beefing with both my wife and Joe right now. I think you guys are the first people that I've talked to in about a week and a half. So like, it's been pretty bad.
Yeah, I feel you, man.
Yeah, if it wasn't for like Google Hangouts or Skype, I would probably be in the same boat. And just being able to video chat for a little bit with friends, it kind of helps, but at the same time, it's like I'd rather see you in person.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I try to stay home so we don't have to stay at home any longer than we need to. But such is life.
Right.
Okay. So we have, I should say, Ben has compiled a list of the 10 worst Wild players, and Tony has also made a list as well. So I'm going to give the floor to Ben and jump right into it.
Sure. So just a little preface on this list. I found that making one subjectively, just picking names out of lineups and saying, oh yeah, that guy sucked, I hated that guy. It was really tough to do because there's a fair amount of blind spot in my Wild fandom for a couple of years there, where I didn't really pay super close attention, through a little bit through my high school years, a little bit after. So instead I went statistical, and I think I still ended up with a pretty decent list. And I'm not saying this is the definitive list of all time of the 10 worst Wild players, because worst is very subjective, and you can make a lot of arguments for players who were on the team for a long time doing a lot of damage, or players who didn't play very much being so terrible they never really got a chance. So I tried to find a little bit of a middle ground, and here's what I did is I took every skater from the skater register from Hockey Reference, and I cut out anyone who played under 15 games for the Wild, and who also had averaged less than like 6 minutes a game, because that's obviously not a whole lot of time to do a whole lot of damage. And it's also a pretty tiny sample size to hold against these guys. Just because, there's lots of weird things that happen in hockey, like enforcers who are generally not good hockey players, but don't get a whole lot of minutes on the ice anyway, which is probably a good thing. And guys who, were called up to fill a hole from AHL for a couple of games. I didn't want to completely throw those guys under the bus. So that's what I did. That gave me a list. And then from there, I basically just sorted by their Corsi percentage, Corsi relative especially, is a decent measure. It's not perfect, and I'm not saying that Corsi is a be-all, end-all. I think advanced stats has moved much beyond that, but that's all I really had available.
Which is completely true, by the way. Corsi is not the end-all, be-all. Expected goals is.
Well, sure, but yeah, I didn't. You're right, and expected goals would be better, but I didn't have that, necessarily available at Hockey Reference. So,
sure.
And the stats only go back so far as well. They only go back to 2007. So the first 7 years of the Wild, or first 6 seasons, I suppose, I didn't have any data on any of those players. I'm sure there were some stinkers in there, but we'll just have to leave that to the imagination. So Anyway,
and I
so
think that's fair too, because we're dealing with an expansion team too. Like if you made it to 2007, then that you can't really blame that on the expansion team thing anymore.
right. Yeah. So what I did is I just measured it by, Corsi relative per 60 minutes worse than negative 15. So essentially they allowed 15 or more Corsi events, shot attempts versus their teammates on the ice at the same time. And I also measured points per game played, and anybody under 0.2, which is kind of a weird number, but just think 16 points a season, which is pretty terrible. So anybody under that pace, that's what we're looking at here. So really bad on Corsi relative per 60, really bad on points scored. And that's how I ended up with my list of 10 players out of the 240 some that have played in Wild history. So does that sound good to you guys, or did I go catastrophically wrong somewhere?
No, let's party.
All right. So number 10, a guy that I'm not super familiar with, but left wing from 2010 to 2012, Warren Peters.
Nobody remembers Warren Peters.
No, nobody does. Even Warren Peters doesn't remember Warren Peters.
He doesn't know where he is. He's like Walter White in that episode, but if he actually did black out.
Let me tell you this. The year was 2011.
Yeah.
At the end of the 2011-12 season, it was the first Mike Yeo season, if I remember right. And Mikko Koivu and Kyle Brodziak both had injuries. So for one, if not 2 or 3 games, Warren Peters was the Wild's top line center.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and
fans
so,
paid money to go see that game, by the way.
Warren Peters sounds like the perfect Mike Yeo player. He played 69 nice games with the Wild.
Nice. And
he managed 6 points in those 69 games.
It is really impressive to be around for like almost 70 games and be as for like I seriously don't know any, and I was paying fairly close attention to the Wild from afar at the time, but like Warren Peters he might have been like the guy that got knocked off by Casey Wellman is like the top prospect way back then. That's how like barren the Wild's prospect cupboard was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a pretty bad stretch. I mean, his
oh no, he was like 28, 29 when he debuted. Oh my god.
Yeah, again, like some of these guys are AHL fill-ins that just got too long of a stay. Warren Peters got way too long of a stay. Anyway, so moving on, number 9 on the list, Eric Christensen played 1 season with the Minnesota Wild. Probably one of those AHL-ish type guys. Only 29 games, but still he mustered 5 whole points in those 29 games. Pretty terrible, defensive numbers, obviously, with Corsi relative and per 60. So
I remember him.
Do either one of you recall Eric Christensen at all? He played in 2011, 2012 as well. He was a teammate of Warren Peters.
The Wild traded for him because he was a shootout specialist. I'm not kidding.
See, this is the blind spot that I'm talking about.
and if you remember, Giles, he actually was pretty good in the shootout, enough that it knocked Minnesota to a worse draft pick. Luckily, it was the 2012 draft, so like nobody was good except for like Hampus. I guess Hampus Lindholm and Morgan Riley. Taking either one of those guys over Matt Dumba, you could argue for, but that was the year where the top 4 was Nail Yakupov, Ryan Murray, Alex Nyuk, and Griffin Reinhart. So honestly, like at the time, I was like, "Oh my God, Eric Christensen is ruining the Wild's draft position." But honestly, Eric Christensen might be like a secret MVP just because we didn't have to draft Nail Yakupov.
Oh, thank God!
So maybe he doesn't deserve to be on this list.
No, he was not good.
Yeah, okay. He was still really bad.
Okay, just checking. All right, it's number 8 on the list, Eric Nystrom, 2010, 2011. He has the second most games on this list. He has the most points on this list, 82 games, so essentially an entire full season, 11 points. And he's a forward.
Eric Nystrom was one of those guys, and I suspect that you've got a few of these guys on your list, and I've got a few of these guys on mine, where Fletcher goes out and he signs them because they're going to make this team tougher to play against. And they made him, and each of these guys made them so tough to play against that they got traded like 2 years into their 4-year deals.
Right.
Like every single one of these guys.
Yeah. Nystrom, like I said, 11 points in 82 games. That's pretty atrocious. And like I said, prefacing all this, defensive metrics were obviously pretty horrendous as well. So
I'm pretty sure the Wild, they signed him to like a multi-year deal in, what was it, 2010. He played that one season, and then I believe it was the Darryl Powell signing that caused him to be traded because they didn't need him anymore.
What could they have possibly gotten for him in return?
They got future considerations.
Oh, so $1. That's probably fair.
$1 was probably too much for that. But he ended up having a 15-goal season in Nashville. But I know plus minus doesn't mean anything. But it is very funny to see a minus 25. Like it just is. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fair.
On Nashville, yeah.
So
15.
moving on, and I really feel bad that this guy isn't much higher in the list because I really think he deserves to be. But this is just how the stats shook out, and probably a credit to some of his teammates for picking up his slack, as we saw, because this is a pretty recent player. The infamous Kyle Quincy comes in at number 7. 2017-18 season with the Wild, played a whopping 18 games. It felt like 81 games because that guy was such a goddamn pylon. He managed 3 whole points in those 18 games, which almost made him ineligible for this list. He was 0.16 points per game played, which is up there. It's actually the highest on this list. Going to show you how bad the rest of the list is. But Kyle Quincy is one that I vividly remember because my God, was that guy terrible. Like the rest of these guys, maybe there are some circumstances, advanced stats aren't perfect. Maybe they were saddled with a really bad, line or defensive partner. It's not as isolated as we'd like. But Kyle Quincy was just effing brutal at hockey.
Kyle Quincy was one of those guys who, you could probably name like a half dozen of these guys right off the top of your head, but guys who are good defensemen because they play like a lot of minutes for a not good team. And that's what his situation was in Detroit. Like when Detroit was on their downswing, Kyle Quincy was soaking up 19, 20 minutes a night, and then he gets old, and then Minnesota signed. I don't remember at the time thinking like this was a horrible contract. Except, was it a 1 year or a 2 year?
I think it was just a 1 year deal.
Okay, so there's no such thing as a bad 1 year deal, but Quincy quickly got chewed up and spit out, and for good reason. Not that Minnesota had a great stable of defensemen at the time on their third pairing, right? This was Gustav Olofsson, Riley, and each of those guys were going to be traded, within a year. But any of those guys, any moment that you're playing Kyle Quincy instead of, some under 25 kids, that's just a waste of ice time and space.
Yeah. And they had signed him and they desperately needed a right-handed defenseman for their third pairing. And they signed him for some inexplicable reason, and then they don't have a right-handed defenseman for their third pairing. So, like you said, they're running out him and Olofsson and Riley and other poor saps on that third line. And I think there was a story that Quincy had basically refused to play the right side. So now these younger guys who were left-handed as well were having to play their offside and obviously weren't nearly as effective. And so this kind of makes you wonder, Riley, certainly a disappointing time here. Olofsson, more injury-related, but also a disappointing time here. Makes me wonder if there isn't some alternate reality where Kyle Quincy isn't signed and those guys turned out to be actually decent third-pair defensemen.
Watching Kyle Quincy play for the Wild, is basically like what we're going through right now. It just torture having to sit inside, be quarantined, no social interaction. You're not feeling good about anything. And that's what watching Kyle Quincy was like.
Yeah, it was so bad. God, he was so bad. All right, anyway, moving on to number 6 on my list. A guy that is probably going to make us a little more sad than anything. Played 2008 to 2012 with the Wild. Forward Colton Gillies.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yep. That Colton Gillies. I believe they traded up for him, didn't they?
They did.
so.
They traded up for him. This
Yeah.
was the year after they got eliminated in 5 games to the Anaheim Ducks. And Minnesota's thinking at the time was something like, oh, you know what we need to stop Chris Pronger from karate chopping Kim Janssen's leg in half?
tough guys.
What?
More tough guys.
Yeah, we need tough guys. So they traded up to get Colton Gillies in the first round. I think they traded up 3 spots. I can't remember what they traded.
It was like a 3rd or a 4th round pick that they gave up to move up a couple of spots.
And it's not like this was a great draft, though. I mean, God, they could have stayed put and gotten Max Pacioretty.
Oh, that would have been terrible.
Or Mikhail Backlund. Never mind. This was an okay. There were a couple of really good options that they could have snagged here. Instead, they get a guy who gave them 18 points. And honestly, if he wasn't a first round pick, there is no way that he would have gotten into the lineup 154 times like he did.
Right.
No.
Yeah. Yep. So
He
was pretty brutal. And just did not score a lot. I mean, 18, like you said, 18 points on 154 games is just absolutely abysmal.
The only good thing about him is he's the closest I've ever gotten to a player having the name Giles on the back of a Wild jersey.
That is very unfortunate. All right.
You could just buy the jersey and just like cut out the stitches for the I and one of the L's.
Just put spaces. Yeah. So we're halfway.
Yeah.
Tony, do you want to give your 10 through 6, and then we'll go to our guest, and then we'll do our 1 to 5.
All right. I just hope that I don't step on any toes in revealing the Ben's 5 through 1. But I'll go through mine. I put my minimum at 70 games. For some, because I just wanted to see guys who stuck around for a while and were bad.
Sure, that's fair.
My number 10 was Stephane Veilleux, and this was more of a lifetime achievement award.
Steve,
I wrote down legit impressive how long he was here while making no impact whatsoever. And this is true, by the way. If you look at his career chart at Evolving Wild or at Evolving Hockey. He is like a replacement level player every year that he's tracked. It's really phenomenal. Like
That's
how
a
consistent
model
he
of
was.
consistency right there.
And he played 428 games. That was 17th all time among Wild players. And he did that while making no impact at all. Number 9, Darryl Powell. I just wrote terrible. Forgettable energy guy that Minnesota got rid of in 1.5 seasons.
Yep.
Number 8, your guy Colton Gillies. Who I wrote the worst draft pick in Wild history since James Shepard. Number 7, James Shepard, the worst draft pick in Wild history since A.J. Thielen. And then number 6 is a guy that I will be surprised if we don't talk about. You let me know if we don't talk about him, but Cam Barker.
Yeah, he did not make my list, actually.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Cam Barker, who was a former 3rd overall pick. That would have been terrible even as the 203rd overall pick. And my only other note was that it was a testament to how good Chicago was that they managed to make this guy look good for a season.
Yeah, he, I don't remember the specifics of the argument for trading Leddy for him. I think obviously there was a lot of potential there that they were banking on. And man, did that just never, ever even come close to showing a glimpse.
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head what the logic was behind the Barker-Letty trade. And even more damning was they threw in Kim Janssen to make it look like the Wild were getting the better end of this deal. And
Kim Janssen was a solid-ish defender. I mean, he wasn't going to blow anybody away, but he was like a guy that you didn't mind having on your team, deep in the defensive pairings.
Okay, here we go. I found it. In the Russo blog from the Star Tribune from February 12th, 2010, when the trade was made, this is a direct quote from Wild assistant general manager Tommy Thompson, who was reached on a scouting trip in regards to Cam Barker. Quote, "You're not going to walk in there in the dead of the night and steal a guy like Cam Barker. You're going to have to give up something that hurts."
This is the guy that drafted both Gillies and Shepard and AJ Thielen and some other bum whose name that we didn't even bother to put on this list. And he's talked and they let him in the building. They did not change the locks on Tommy Thompson
And there's more.
When Fletcher came to Minnesota.
Yeah.
Barker will get better as he gets older, matures, puts everything together. This guy's played pretty well in the National Hockey League. He's a big mobile guy who can shoot the puck.
Hey, let's not hate on Cam Barker too hard. I believe that he is having a robust career putting it all together in the KHL. Honestly, I think that he's actually decent in the KHL.
That's good for him.
Also, as an aside in this deal, the Wild were concerned about Nick Leddy's development at the University of Minnesota.
Right. That was the classic knock on Lucia's, that he couldn't develop anybody.
Yeah, that worked out great.
Right.
Wow. I was trying not to have a beer or alcohol of any kind today, but reading that quote is going to push me over the edge.
He has... I just looked him up. Cam Barker has 9 points in 12 games in France's hockey league.
Nice. Sacre bleu.
Cam Baguettes.
Oh, boy. All right, so we are halfway through the 10 worst Wild player lists of all time. So we are going to go to our other guest on the show this week, Audra Martin. We're going to check in with her for a few minutes, and then we will return for the top 5. All right, joining us on the Giles and the Goalie hotline is the FSN studio host for the Minnesota Wild pregame and postgame shows. She is Audra Martin. Audra, how are you today?
I am doing good. How are you guys doing?
Okay, my cat decided to answer for me, but we're...
I couldn't tell if that was a cat or if that was a small child. That was an impressive meow.
That's him telling me to go to work like a normal person because he wants to take a nap.
I think my cats are getting sick of me too.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think it's throwing the cats for more of a loop than it's throwing most humans.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, we're hanging in there. We're staying quarantined. How are you during the self quarantine or self isolation, essentially?
Yeah, I've been doing okay. I mean, it's I would assume it's probably like most people, where there are some days where, like, oh, this is a piece of cake, and then there are some days where, I start to really worry about stuff, or I start to really wish I could see my family and friends, and it kind of weighs on you. And so, there's good days and bad days, and it's just, I feel like I'm kind of sitting in a state of shock still, I guess. It just seems still very surreal.
Yeah.
Does it seem at all possible that this past weekend would have been the end of the NHL regular season that hasn't fully sunk in yet, that we're at that point in the year already?
Yeah, it hasn't sunk in, and it's been those days, like those kind of milestones where I feel like it hits me. Like I had a just major sad day the other day when it was supposed to be the Twins home opener and the start of the season on the road. Just days like that when you think, oh man, I would be doing this normally. Those are the moments that tend to kind of get me down. But yeah, thinking about the fact that the regular season would have been ending. We would have been gearing up for the playoffs. It's just surreal. It's some days I feel like it's only been a couple days that we've been in quarantine, and then some days I feel like it's been 3 months already.
Yeah, no, exactly. It feels way longer than just 3 weeks since we've seen sports, and it feels like an eternity ago we were watching Kevin Fiala take on the rest of the NHL himself.
Right. Right. Well, guys, I texted you guys when you asked me to jump on the podcast. I was like, man, I gotta think back to the end of the end of the season as of right now. I had to kind of refresh my memory. Like, what was the last game? Oh, that's right. They had won, what was it, 8 out of their last 11, and just kind of thinking back to some of those really awesome games there towards the end, because it does in those moments seem like it's been so long. It's almost crazy to talk hockey again because it has been so long since I've been able to talk hockey. So I appreciate you guys having me on for that point alone. It's just nice to kind of reminisce on that good stretch, and it's really, really sad though to think just if they do continue with the postseason, things like that, if they go off of where things stand right now, just how much of a disappointment and the heartbreaker that the Wild were so close, but not close enough.
Have you been following kind of the reports on possible playoff structures at all? And do you have maybe one that you liked above any of the others?
I've followed a little, a couple, but to be honest with you guys, it really bums me out. I've found myself kind of reading those scenarios and then stopping because it's just a reminder of the fact that, what we're going through right now. And me, in a lot of those situations, it looks like the Wild would be on the outside of it. So sometimes I stop reading. I've seen the ones, going on just the top 8 in each conference right now just on points. I've seen going on points percentage. I've seen, seeding based on how they are right now. I've seen possible play-in type game scenarios, and I go back and forth. I don't really know if I know what the best situation would be, because I do find it to be a little bit unfair if those teams that have not played as many other games as other teams have. So, and I know that makes me biased towards the Wild because they have games in hand on a lot of people. So and that's where I feel like I really maybe shouldn't have an opinion, because the team I cover on a regular basis is on the outside looking in. And so a lot of my opinions are based off of disappointment and anger.
Yeah, we've thought we've found all the different ways the NHL schedule could come back to bite the Wild when they have an eternity of off days in October and November. Yep. And now we've found another way that it's bit them again when they have all these games in hand.
Well, it's an excellent point, because there are those situations. You always have that conversation, especially in the preview show, where it's like, oh, are they going to be well rested after having 4 days off? Or are they going to be rusty after having 4 days off? And now it's like, well, I wish that they never had 4 days off in a row, because we may be looking at a very different situation.
Yeah. Do you, I guess I had kind of brought this up on a radio hit I did yesterday, but if they did come back and had some kind of postseason briefly in July or August, whenever, would you be concerned with kind of the quality we've come to expect from the Stanley Cup playoffs being a bit less than usual, because these guys have been off for 3-4 months?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I find kind of intriguing about the whole situation. How in shape are these guys going to be? I mean, obviously, I know they're all working out like crazy, but we all know that there's a huge difference between just working out at home and, any facilities that they might have in their houses compared to actual game action. It's night and day. So, yeah, what kind of quality play would we see? If the Wild, let's say, were one of the teams that were going to make it, a perfect example would be Kevin Fiala. He was on fire, red hot. What would he look like coming back now? Would he be able to pick up where he left off? Would he be in as great shape? Like, that's the disappointment stuff to me. Like, some of these guys who might not have the opportunity to continue what's been a really impressive hot streak. Like Alex Stigler, who has been so impressive in so many big situations, and now we may not be able to see what else he has in store in a situation like this season where he took over as the number one goaltender. And those are the things that really bum me out, thinking about the possibility of not seeing Wild hockey, for the rest of this quote-unquote season. I mean, hopefully we will see it again in October, but even then, like, how different is it going to be? Like, there are going to be players who are going to retire between now and then, and they didn't even really get to play their last official game. It just kind of was taken away from them because of this crazy circumstance. So all of those things are just reasons that sometimes I just sit here and I feel like dumbfounded that this is actually happening.
Yeah, you mentioned, how many players have played their last game kind of unexpectedly, and I think the one that really hits close to home here is Mikko Koivu, who we weren't sure what's going to happen with him beyond this year, and it's the last year of his contract, and maybe he was leaning on just retiring instead of coming back. We have to find out, but that would be certainly a very sad ending to what's been otherwise a very great career.
Yeah, if I was a player like Mikko in that situation, I would almost feel like I had to come back for one more year because, for just to end so abruptly and not really be able to kind of soak in the moment and really appreciate your last couple of games. So as an athlete, I think that would be important to me to really be able to sit there and look around and really soak it in and make sure that you really are appreciating, the last couple of games of your career. And so to not realize that game against, was the Ducks, I believe, if I'm correct, can you imagine being like, well, little did I know that was the last game I was ever going to play. That would be hard for me, I think, to go forward and just feel like I wasn't really, appreciating my final season because some of these guys probably didn't expect it to be their final games, in March.
Yeah, no, like I said, you certainly hope there's some kind of maybe brief finish to the regular season where he could maybe get that last chance, but with the way things are going, you're not sure if it's going to shake out that way, but you can only hope at this point.
Yeah. And, and who knows? I mean, I guess maybe it could have the opposite effect, too. Maybe there are some guys that look at this like, well, I'm now totally at peace with my decision. I was wavering if I was going to retire this year or not, and maybe they're looking at this like, yeah, this is, out of my hands. Maybe this is a sign. It is time to just walk away and be at peace with the fact that it was kind of taken away from me, and I'll just live with that. I mean, I don't know. I guess every player, I'm sure, is different with how they're thinking about things.
Yeah. Ben, do you have any questions?
No, I think just on the Koivu thing, it seems to me like if he could very well be one of those kind of guys that is perfectly okay with hanging up. I don't know. Maybe it's just his public persona, but it doesn't strike me as a super sentimental type.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I think that's fair. I mean, we always poke fun at Mikko when he smiles in the post-game interviews, like, "Oh, Mikko was smiling and laughing."
Yeah.
And I think the world of him. I think he's a great guy, great player, great leader. So, but yeah, I would agree. He probably would say the same thing. Like, he's not an overly sentimental, emotional guy in that sense. So, I would be curious to know what's going on in his head right now.
Right. Along those lines, we're talking about the possible solutions. Something that's been thrown around a little bit is a single site kind of thing. They're throwing around just having all the teams in one place. Mm-hmm. And as somebody in the media who's been around a lot of that, a lot of the NHL and a lot of how it's set up, what do you think that's something that's even really feasible? Do you think that's something that we could possibly see, or is it just kind of a weird pipe dream?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could see it happening because at this point I can see anything happening. I mean, these situations and scenarios that people have been tossing around, if you would have said something about them, a year ago, everybody would have laughed and be like, well, what on earth would happen to cause that to be, the situation? So, yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you guys. When this was first going on, before the NBA, finally postponed the season and kind of got the ball rolling in that sense, I was kind of coming to terms or coming to grips with going to games and not having fans. And that in itself was really weird to think about.
Right.
But so at that moment, I really didn't think, okay, they're going to just shut down the season completely. But then with Rudy Gobert and like backtracking where all, his team went and arenas that share, NBA and NHL teams share those arenas, then it starts to make sense where it's like, well, man, you just don't understand. There's no way to even really grasp how wide even just one player in the NBA may have affected things. So, I mean, having a neutral site, I think, in some ways could maybe work. And the only reason I say that too, because I know that's been tossed around with baseball, that if they push the season back, well, once you start having the postseason, I mean, let's be honest, do we, I think the Twins will be in the postseason this year. Can I look forward to postseason baseball in November in Minnesota? Probably not. So in that case, I'm guessing we'll be playing at a neutral site somewhere else. So in that case, yeah, I can kind of envision that happening, but the logistics of it, working around arenas that already had concerts on their schedules and things, that's the kind of thing that I just cannot even imagine being behind the scenes and trying to come up with an actual game plan, because there's just going to be so many elements and so many aspects of things that are going to be up in the air and affected by it that it's mind-boggling to me.
Right.
Yeah, so I guess we just have a few more questions for our guest, Audra Martin here.
I've got all the time in the world, gentlemen.
I know. So these are just kind of questions we ask to all of our guests, just because these are some debates Ben and I love to have on the podcast, so we always have to ask our guests to see where they fall. The first one we love to ask is, do you have a favorite hockey jersey of all time? Or if you're like us and you can't narrow it down to one specifically, what would your Mount Rushmore be?
Oh my gosh. Favorite of all time. See, that's tough, and I I have to answer this, but I feel like people are going to hate me for saying this, but I think it's it's not a secret. I grew up in Chicago, and so I will say, though, everybody assumes that I grew up a huge Blackhawks fan. That's not the case. I grew up in a family of absolute sports, I don't want to say idiots, but nobody in my family watches sports or pays attention to sports at all. So, needless to say, I didn't really grow up watching a ton of Blackhawks games. When I did, it was, on a TV in my bedroom. And I grew up in the time where they decided to black out, home games because they wanted everybody to go to the games in person. So, my opportunities to watch games when I was younger were a bit limited. But I have to say the Blackhawks home jerseys have always been one of my favorites. But don't hate me. I don't want people to hate me. The other ones I would say is I appreciate like tradition, and I love, old school original six and stuff. So Rangers, the Rangers blue shirts, like from back in the day too, are some of my favorites. Don't hate me on that one either.
We're totally with you. We blur the lines here as well. We both professed our love for the Blackhawks classic look, and also Giles, I believe, has the Rangers at the very tip top of his board. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Rangers are one of the best.
Dodge that bullet.
No bias here when it comes to jerseys.
Right.
Then the other question we have to ask is, and this is a little bit off the board, but can you consider soup stand alone to be a meal?
Oh, I love this question. That's right up there with is hot dog a sandwich?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, I personally can consider soup a meal.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, caveat: I typically will have something else with it, like a roll or a side salad or something like that. But if I'm at home, like I'll be honest with y'all, I have been eating a lot of soup during this quarantine. So in that case, I have been doing the soup thing by itself as a meal.
That's perfect.
I'm sorry.
That's music to my ears.
Yeah.
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 Well, see, now you guys have to answer my question: is a hot dog a sandwich?
Ooh. I guess in the culinary world, I think the hot dog kind of should be its own category. Kind of like how we get asked this question. We ask the soup question. A lot of people ask us on chili. Chili is a soup, but I think chili is kind of its own category. So I would say hot dog is, but push comes to shove, I would say a hot dog is a sandwich.
Yeah, interesting. I have never thought about the chili debate.
Yeah,
I wouldn't consider chili a soup.
Yeah, we don't either.
Yeah.
I say no.
Yeah.
I just can't call it a sandwich. It feels like it should have some of those sandwich type qualities, but I can't consider it a sandwich.
Yeah, well, I agree. I can't, and it's one of those things. Some people start arguing that it's a sandwich. I just leave the conversation because I don't get it. It's not a sandwich. It's a hot dog.
Yeah.
Is it the official Chicago stance on hot dogs, or
maybe that's where it comes from? Yeah, because maybe because like Chicago style. It's unfair too, though, because like the typical Chicago style hot dog, doesn't have ketchup. But I put ketchup on hot dogs, so but I put everything. I put everything. Like I am ketchup, mustard, mayo, relish, onions, like whatever you got, put it on there. So
yeah.
Look at you guys asking the hard questions. I like it.
Yeah. We're out here asking the tough food questions that really take our guests by surprise. All right, well, Audra, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you during the pause we're experiencing in sports?
Well, they can find me on Twitter. My handle is Audra_Martin. I'm also on Instagram. That's Audra.Martin. And I got to give props to Fox Sports North. I mean, obviously it's a really trying time, but they are, coming up with ways to still deliver sports content to people. And so we are broadcasting classics of the Twins, Wild, Wolves, everybody. So in a couple days, we are starting our first Wild. We had one already where Gorg was live tweeting during one of the games. So I will be live tweeting a couple games here over the next couple of weeks, some of the classics. And for me, it's really exciting because all of the quote-unquote classics happened before I got here. And so I've never seen these games. So I'm going to be watching them for the most part as a fan for the first time. So it will be really interesting, like the Game 7 against Colorado, the first ever home game at the XL Energy Center. That's another one that I'll be live tweeting during. So I would love for everybody to tune in and join me because, like I said, I never got to see those games. So I'm really, really excited to finally now have an understanding of just how impactful and how big those games were in Wild history.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating to see somebody who's never seen that before take a look at it with a fresh set of eyes. So
yeah, that's where I have to admit I'm an outsider. I like to feel like I'm a Minnesotan officially, but I know I'm not. But so I'm very excited to kind of take a trip down memory lane. It'll be fun.
As I'm sure you found out, Minnesotans are very liberal with claiming people as their own. So
Yeah, I've had it hit or miss. Like some people are like, yeah, you've been here long enough. Like we'll consider you one of our own. And then some people are like, you're from Chicago, you'll never be a Minnesotan. But at least I'm not a White Sox fan. I've always had that going for me. Like I'm a Cubs fan, and so I think if I was a White Sox fan, that would have probably made my transition over here that much harder.
We'll allow it. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we will. We'll definitely look forward to those classic games, and we'll definitely follow along with your live tweets, and hopefully down the road once we get back into the hockey season, whenever that happens, we'll have to catch up again.
Absolutely, I would love to. Fingers crossed that it's sooner rather than later.
Right.
Amen to that. Well, Audra, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, you guys stay safe and stay healthy.
Yeah, you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Bye.
All right, we're back. Thank you again to Audra for taking some time to join us, although she said she had plenty of time, and also really, really appreciated her just rolling with the fact that the cat cut her off. So that was much appreciated. All right, 5 through 1. We're going through the worst 10 players in the history of Minnesota Wild. We did 6 through 10 in the beginning of the show. Now we're on 5 through 1. So I will yield the floor again.
Sure. So my list is a little bit different than Tony's. That most of my guys, all my guys left actually, played under 70 games, so there won't be any crossover there. Again, I went over 15 games, but I figured that was enough time.
No, it is. Like
to see the damage that's done, as we notably talked about with Kyle Quincy's 18 games. I certainly didn't want to disclude him from the conversation because he very much earned his spot on this list. So. Anyway, so moving up to number 5 on the list for me, defenseman, the second and last defenseman on this list, Sean Hill, from 2007, 2008, played 35 whole games for the Minnesota Wild, registered a whopping 4 points, had a Corsi percentage, relative percentage of negative 8.3, which is pretty brutal. So. Any fond Sean Hill memories from you guys?
When he peed hot. And got busted for steroids. That's why it was only 35 games in a Wild uniform, because he got suspended. He's like one of the only people to get suspended for roids under the
I forgot about that
program.
I just remember they brought him in because they again were looking for somebody who was a little more in the sandpapery department. So Kim Janssen didn't get broke in half. And then, of course, Sean Hill played only 35 games. And he was also roughly 73 years old at the time, at the end of his career. And the other caveat that the Wild tried to sell you on him was he was a Stanley Cup winner with Carolina. So they were bringing in some Stanley Cup pedigree.
Oh, I got one of those later in the list. That's a lot of fun.
Was he a Stanley Cup winner or just a Stanley Cup finalist?
Oh, they won.
He wasn't there for that year, though.
Oh, he wasn't?
He was in Florida that year.
Oh.
They won the Stanley Cup the year after they got rid of him, so they need that experience.
I thought
they were hoping to win the Stanley Cup in the year after he left.
They learned from... Yeah, that's fair.
Oh, my bad. I thought he was on some Stanley Cup winning team, but I guess not.
I think Carolina made the Cup final one year. Maybe that was it?
Yeah, 2002 they did.
Okay, yeah, he would have been on that team.
Okay, so he was a Stanley Cup finalist. He knows what it takes to get there.
That's right. All right. So anyway, moving on to my top 4. These are kind of almost all the same ilk. They're all, well, not quite, but these next 3 are definitely of the same ilk. They're kind of the Fletcher special, and guys who probably just got a little bit too long. Well, I mean, at least 2 of them were AHL guys that probably got too long of a stay. Number 4, Cody Almond, 2009 to 12 center, played 25 whole games, registered 2 goals and no assists in those 25 games. I think he definitely kind of fits the mold of an AHL guy that just, should have been organizational depth and somehow ended up playing a quarter of a season.
So basically, I don't know how many more you have on this list from that team. I don't have any specific memory of Cody Allman. I'm just putting something in here just for the sake of commenting at this part. But so far on this list, the 2011-2012 Minnesota Wild is represented by 5 players on Ben's list already. And remember, they had the best record in the NHL through mid-December before they completely fell off a cliff.
Yeah. Yep.
That is a big reason why Josh Harding is not on this list, because he was good enough to carry that team for 30 games to first place in the NHL.
Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is pretty wild. Cody Allman, the least amount of points per game on this list, 0.08. So, yeah, he was on pace for roughly 8 points, or less than 8 points, or like 7 points on the entire season. So, 82 games, he would have scored 7 points.
Oof.
That's pretty brutal. So, the next name on this list was a little bit surprising to me. Not super surprising, but a guy that, maybe had a little bit of promise for some time, but just never really put it together. And again, I'm a little bit surprised he's here and this high. Number 3, Tyler Graovac, 2014-17 with the Wild, 57 games total, mustered just 9 points in those 57 games. And, maybe the positive note on him is I believe the Wild got a 5th-round draft pick for him. From the Capitals, and I don't think he spent a lot of time there either.
No.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't thing about Tyler Graovac is, he kind of made something out of himself, even to play 52 games in the NHL just with his story. No, honestly, like he was a 7th-round pick. And nobody really thought that he was going to be anything at all, and he ended up making the show. He's got 70 career games under his belt. Not a good player, but for where he was drafted, to get any NHL games out of him, that's something. I don't want to dump on Tyler Graovac because, like, I think it's I just think it's like a cool story that he like kind of like lifted himself from like this like fringe prospect, non-prospect territory and kind of improved into the NHL. I don't know why I have a soft spot for Tyler Graovac of all people, but apparently I do.
He does have more games played than some Wild 1st-round draft picks. I'll give him that.
Very true. Yeah, what really killed him was the negative 10% Corsi relative, which is pretty brutal. As you guys have perused a stat sheet or two, you know that's a pretty nasty number when you're 10% worse than the rest of your teammates when it comes to Corsi.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, like that is the case, but at the same time, like we're not talking about like really good Wild 4th line. Actually, like the year that he played, no, that was a good 4th line for the most part in 2016-17. So never mind. I'm done apologizing for Tyler Graovac.
All right. So moving on to number 2 on the list, another guy that's more, kind of along the same lines as Graovac and Allman. Zach Mitchell is a guy who didn't spend a whole lot of time up with the Wild from 2016 to 2018. He was very much the AHL guy that got a decent amount of playing time for whatever reason, but played 34 games with the Minnesota Wild. 4 points in those 34 games. And yeah, as I sorted this list by Corsi relative, he's the 2nd worst on this list with a negative 11%. So really not a good showing for him, but kind of a guy that, similar to the a few other guys on this list, not necessarily an NHLer anyway.
No, decent AHLer. Wasn't he the guy who went on this like absurd, like almost Jerry Mayhew and tear for like a couple weeks in the AHL. I remember somebody just like racking up a huge amount of points in like the first couple of weeks of the AHL, and this might have been Zach Mitchell, but could have been another anonymous AHL guy.
Yeah, I don't. It sounds kind of familiar-ish. You might be on the right track, but yeah, I just think that he's, in baseball you have what's a 4A player, and that's probably the most accurate description of Zach Mitchell. Is definitely a guy that maybe was good in the AHL, but was definitely not suited for the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so finally, number one on this list, and this is a guy that I remember a lot of vitriol about during his one season or a little less than one season here. A guy that was pretty terrible and was kind of a Fletcher, like we talked about, bringing in a guy with some championship experience. This guy had a couple of rings during his time with the LA Kings. He is the one and only Jarrett Stoll.
Oh my
2015
God.
to 16, 51 games, 6 whole points. The worst Corsi relative in Wild history for players with more than 15 games at 13%. He was just absolutely brutal. And I think they brought him in, with the whole championship pedigree thing. They brought him in to win faceoffs, which I believe he won like 37% of his faceoffs that season. And finally, after 51 games, they kind of realized that, this is just not working.
I mean, you remembered that a little wrong. He did win 57% of his faceoffs,
Oh, he
but
did.
everything else was just brutal.
I thought he was brutal in the faceoffs as well. I misremember the 7 in there then.
Yeah, so the Wild claimed him off of waivers.
There it is, 57.
December of 2015. And you're reading straight out of the quote from Chuck Fletcher. Hopefully a player like Jarrett with his pedigree and experience and the intangibles that he brings will help us get there. Well, he helped get Chuck Fletcher a new head coach the following offseason.
For as much as Fletcher was in terms of being ahead of the curve a little bit in terms of analytics, in terms of hiring smart people like AC Thomas and Alex Mandrycky to be a part of the front office, he sure believed that players just somehow magically got better by standing next to great players.
Yep. Yeah, he had, I don't know if it was like some kind of 80s Oilers effect that he was looking to go for or what, but it never. And the funny thing is to me, and we talked about this in podcasts when Fletcher was still around, he hires brilliant analytical people and then seemingly never listened to them. Like every move that he made really like almost spit in the face of analytics. From what we can tell anyway, from the analytics that we have available to us as just, mouth breathing bloggers, it just never made any sense to me. Like he had the War on Ice like brass in his office and still signed guys like this.
Yeah, I don't know if that's entirely fair. Just because, like, if you look at like Marcus Foligno's WAR statistics, for example, they make that trade look a lot better analytically, like at the time than the information that we had publicly at that time. So
okay,
like there was a little bit like that, but you're right in that they would just like do these like depth moves, like Kyle Quincy too. They would do these depth moves that were like bad. And like, don't get me wrong, like at one point in his career, Jarrett Stoll was, a good NHL player. But he was completely washed at that time, and he was put on waivers by the Rangers for a reason. Like, that was not a very good analytics team, and he was like a bottom of the barrel analytics guy on that team. Like there would be moves that he would make that were legitimately savvy and underrated, and even some that like didn't look at the time. But kind of history and going back with some of the data that we have now. Looks a lot better in hindsight. This does not. This is one of those moves we're talking about.
Yeah, yep, for sure. So that's my list. I think in hindsight, after making it, I wanted to be analytical. I wanted to use statistics. But I think I probably like Tony's list better, even though we don't even know the top 5 yet, just because those guys probably did more damage at the end of the day. I probably could have upped my games played to a higher number like he did, and maybe been a little bit more analytical that way, and that long-term damage really should outweigh these guys with 20-some games that just were never meant to be NHL players.
No worries. I think we have a good balance. I think that's fair. I think it makes for a more interesting show that we had 2 different approaches. Do you want me to go 5 through 1?
Yeah.
All right. Brad Staubitz, guys.
Speaking of enforcers who never really belonged on the ice.
Well, here's
for
the thing,
like other than enforcing.
Like any other enforcer that I can think of has like a moment that I can remember for them. Brad Staubitz had 246 penalty minutes. I cannot remember one fight that he had ever.
Yeah, that's rough. I mean, the game certainly has changed, but we still do have fond memories of Matt Johnson, Derek Bogard, certainly. This guy, I think that, he was kind of at the tail end of enforcers being slowly phased out of the game, and he's players like him are a big reason why.
And he could play maybe like a little bit more than some of the enforcers that you listed off, but it was not by very much. Like, no, this is not a guy who would be playing today.
He averaged 6 minutes and 31 seconds in his time with the Wild.
Oof.
Right. Yeah, that's probably why he didn't make my list. Is because
what was the contract that they got him to? How many years was that contract?
I want to say it was a 3-year deal.
Oof.
Yeah, I think it was.
There was a time where like he would sign a guy like Brad Staubitz every year to like a 3-year deal, and it's just like, why?
Yeah,
why
it was
ever do this?
I remember they traded for him before free agency in 2010 because they wanted his rights, so they gave up a 5th-round draft pick, and then they signed him to a deal. And then he was traded a year and a half into that deal, and then he was not signed to a contract again until 2012.
See, I wish that me at like my meanest stat nerd could go into a time machine and go and yell at the Wild for these moves. Because at the time I was not like, I was not like a stats guy by any means. And I was just like, oh yeah, he'll make the team harder to play against. And it was just like, that was one of the big things that kind of woke me up, was just like seeing this happen every year. And every one of these guys is going to make the team tougher to play against. And Minnesota would just strangely be at the bottom of the standings every year.
Wait.
Yeah, not that tough to play against.
That was a 2-year deal. My bad. They still gave up a 5th-round pick for a guy they could probably get in free agency in 10 days.
A guy that they could have pulled out of the ECHL. Jeez.
Right.
Yeah. All
Anyway.
right. So number 4, and this is out of most hated players in Wild history, this guy could have been number 1 easy. I gave him a little bit of credit, and put Martin Skula at number 4. I wrote the worst decision maker in team history. All of Marek Zhidlitsky's bad qualities with none of the good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very accurate. I felt bad not having Skula on my list, honestly, because, I mean, talk about hated. Like, that guy was easily the most hated Wild player in history, as far as I can remember, by their own fans at least. And man, it seemed like that guy could not make a good decision out on the ice. Like you think of I believe it was the Marian Gaborik 5-goal game where Skula like inexplicably tripped over the blue line and coughed up the puck for an easy goal, and it's just things like that just kind of layered on top of each other during his time here.
I kind of want to go to the X wearing a Martin Skula jersey, and just to see what kind of reaction I would get. I bet so many like 40-year-old people would come up to me and just like talk to me. I don't know if I would like go like, oh yeah, I know he's bad, or if I would like try to like defend Skula to them, like, no man, he was awesome, he scored. But I would love to go to the X in a Skula jersey.
The perfect way to describe Martin Skula's time here is from his infamous play in the Marion Gabrick 5-goal game when he literally fell down holding the puck on his own goal line and the Rangers scored.
Yeah, that's what I just read. You're right. It was his goal line, not the blue line. Yeah, that was just bizarre. Like that was. You're right. It was the perfect microcosm.
It just. Yeah. Next.
My number 3 is actually 2 people because I think they're similar enough so that they could count as one person. I thought, and that's Justin Falk / Clayton Stoner. All of Martin Skula's bad qualities with none of the good.
Remember when Stoner left and signed with Anaheim for a hilariously huge deal, and then blasted the Wild organization for giving Ryan Suter so many minutes? It's like, Clay, buddy, Ryan's actually good at hockey, and you're very much not. So that's why Ryan gets minutes and you don't.
Clayton Stoner, the emblematic signature moment of his career was passing a puck perfectly from his defensive zone to the top of the defensive zone to Marian Hossa for an easy goal against. That's Clayton Stoner's big moment here.
Yeah, wasn't there something with him and he was bear hunting or something stupid like that when?
Yeah,
I forget exactly what the situation was.
He had a picture of a bear head.
Oh yeah.
So it was a 4-year, $13 million deal when he signed with the Ducks.
Jeez.
And there was a huge backlash locally for the Wild just letting Clayton Stoner walk out the door after the 2014 playoffs. And everyone just seemed to think this was the worst. The Wild are going to lose a good third-pair defenseman, blah, blah, blah. And if memory serves,
how many of them
I'm
said
pretty
trade Spurgeon instead?
I'm pretty sure Joe went on local radio into one of the call-in segments and was defending it amidst the avalanche of everyone else being mad about it.
Back when Joe thought you could reason it with talk radio.
No.
What are you doing giving any third-pair defender a 4-year deal? The money obviously wasn't that bad, $13 million, whatever. That's not that terrible. But
that's $3 million a year. That's pretty bad for him.
Well, no, it is.
Nothing guy.
No, you're right. But I think the term is worse.
Oh yeah. But
4 years for any third-pair defender, that's just absolutely wild. And I think didn't he end up going to Vegas in the expansion draft or something like that?
Yeah.
Wasn't that the final year of that deal?
Yeah, let me look it up. But yeah, he was
a
taken
dump.
by
they
the
had
Ducks.
to give them Theodore to take.
Yeah.
Stoke.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's what the deal was. They ended up dealing him. They had to attach him to Shea Theodore.
Yep. That's right.
Oh God, that's brutal.
Though I gotta say, unironically cool is whatever Clayton Stoner jerseys are still out there.
Especially because he was number 4.
Yeah,
so
no.
All you needed was the 20.
You go to the game with your boo. You're wearing your Clayton Stoner jersey. Your boo's wearing the Ryan Suter jersey. It's a good time. Number 2, I just kind of picked a guy, and I picked him to give him credit more than anything else. But you could just insert any enforcer you want in there. John Scott, 3 points in 72 games.
Yeah, that's pretty brutal.
Just a big guy who fought. Though I will say this for Scott, he was in on the bit with I don't know if you guys have ever seen the classic picture of him wearing a shirt of him scoring his first goal in 2 years or something like that. And of course there's that really cool story of him, being the All-Star Game MVP.
Right.
He was in on the bit, and I think that we can appreciate that, if not, appreciate his play on the ice, which was, he was who he was.
I think John Scott will always be remembered fondly by any hockey fans, just because the All-Star Game bit absolutely, but in tandem with that, how the NHL completely made an S show out of that whole situation.
Oh yeah, like that was
just phenomenal.
Yeah,
it just really does show you the great decision-making skills of Gary Bettman in the NHL.
Like they literally forced a team to trade a player so he couldn't play in the All-Star Game. Like it's like that. I don't think that gets talked about enough. Like they literally forced a trade of a player so that he couldn't play in their stupid exhibition that was supposed to be for fun. Like, what the hell?
And you know what? Like, that does take a level of competence that, like, Gary Bettman in the NHL almost never show in any other aspect of their regime.
Yeah. We don't talk about it as much because the NHL always does something stupider than they did the week before, so we forget about it.
Yeah, it's a tremendous game of one-upsmanship they play with themselves.
Well, and I think that they could rush in and take the credit for making that moment happen when he did win the All-Star Game. Like they made it the All-Star Game MVP. Like they really acted like they had nothing to do with that. So that's why it gets forgotten about is that it was water under the bridge. He won the MVP, and everyone can just feel good about it. They never made the John Scott movie, did they?
No, I don't think so.
No, that kind of slowly died too.
Right. I think I talked over you, Giles. Did you have anything?
No. I just said that movie kind of slowly died too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. And number one is a guy like I didn't feel good putting John Scott at number 2 or anything like that. But here's a guy who I think that I can feel all right putting at number 1, and that's Zenon Konopka.
Yes.
Some notes that I wrote on Zenon Konopka, and then I'll turn it over to you guys. 2 points in 73 games. His bunny rabbit was a better player.
Yep.
And he was the only guy who trashed Yo where Yo was in the right on. And I guess that's not true because you guys mentioned Clayton Stoner, but those are my notes on Zenon Konopka.
Yeah, was it not him that they made the rule about the face-off hand swiping? Wasn't that like his patented move, I feel like?
Might have been.
That sounds right.
Where he would just like basically tie a guy up or like basically like, go on all fours and bull rush a guy and then swipe the puck with his hand. And that became a penalty literally because of him.
Yeah, that sounds right. He was a pretty prominent face-off guy. It's 59.6 career face-off percentage.
Yeah. I mean, none of it would be legitimate now, but yeah.
No.
I just want to point out his 2012-13 season. 37 games, no points.
God, that's terrible.
117 penalty minutes, though.
Yeah, he racked them up.
Yeah, he was a weird, like, combination of Jarrett Stoll and Brad Staubitz.
if they made
like
a
a
Frankenstein.
Out of it too. Yeah, it was like he was like a hockey player made from parts of lesser hockey players to create an even lesser hockey player.
Oh. I remember he also tried to make like this line of wine when he was here? Like
what?
If anyone,
God, I do remember this.
If anyone out there listening like actually bought this wine, chime in and let us know how it was.
I'm Googling this. It might not be in business anymore. I don't know if it is or not.
I hope it is. We're all buying a bottle and drinking it on the next episode.
No, I don't think so. Some of these wine names, though, are pretty good. The Wild One.
Oh, original.
No, that's pretty much it. There was one called the Power Play.
Okay.
It looks like it has 0 ratings, which makes a lot of sense because he spent 0 minutes on the power play in his career.
Oh, God. Yeah. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and our friend of the podcast, voice of Gopher Hockey, Charlie Beatty, can back us up. I believe Charlie Beatty's blog before he joined us at Wild Extra was called Konopka-esque. and obviously Charlie was a smart guy. He knew how terrible Zenon Konopka was and had a great sense of humor. So I believe that is correct. We'll have to fact check that with the one and only Charlie Beatty, but I believe his blog was Konopka-esque, which is pretty solid.
Pretty smart, because I don't even, like, when somebody says something is Kafka-esque, I don't know what they're talking about, because all I know about Kafka is the story about the guy who wakes up and, like, he's a cockroach, but, like, I don't really know what it means. He's just a cockroach. Like, I tried reading it once, and it was just like, okay, this guy's a cockroach. I don't, like, what am I supposed to read into this? I don't know. He's a cockroach.
What's the message here? I don't get it.
He's running away every time the lights are turned on. I've got no
Oh, tremendous.
I did not fare well as an English teacher, guys.
That's why I didn't even try it. So pretty solid list, Tony. I really enjoyed your list. Like I said, probably better in the terms of long-term damage to the Minnesota Wild. With all those guys at least playing roughly a season's worth of games and stinking up the joint. So, Giles, did you have any names that you wanted added to this fine episode?
Just out of the ones in, really since like 2005-06 when I really took off with following the Wild, I really think we hit all the names in there. So I think, between the two lists, it's pretty solid.
Yeah. Yeah, there is, some, unfortunately, and any team's history, you're going to have some bad players, but, like you mentioned with the 2011, 2012 Wild, there was some definite rosters put together there that were very regrettable.
Yep. So that, those were the lists, and because they're almost two completely different lists, we can probably make some kind of Twitter poll to get people interested even more in listening to this. Gotta find a way to plug it even more.
Sure.
Any final thoughts before we call it a show?
No. I thank Tony for making a list of his own, because it was great to have the supplemental list of guys that deserved to be shat upon as much as the guys on my list. So,
yeah. Tony, any last thoughts, and what you can give a plug to where people can find you and all your work as well?
You can find me on Twitter at @OhHiTony. If you have not subscribed to The Athletic, they are doing for the next 90 days, they're doing it for free. So if you want to dig into some of my backlogs, if you haven't been able to check it out at The Athletic Minnesota, you can check out the stories that I've written this year, or even like some from last year. I think might still hold some relevance. But this year I wrote stories on Marcus Foligno and what kind of made him so special. And this was before he went on that tear in the middle of the year too. So you can check that out. Another one, I think the most recent one that I wrote was on Kevin Fiala emerging as a superstar. So there is stuff there at The Athletic Minnesota that if you have not gotten the chance to read, go and take that time and really dig into to some of that work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Tony, for joining us for the 10 worst Wild players. Again, just our ongoing ploy to break up you and Joe. Also, thanks to
I'm sorry, my honorable mention, Joe Booley, 11th worst Minnesota Wild player of all time. Oh,
burn.
Come at me, brother.
Ooh. Yeah, and also thanks to Audra Martin for joining us again this week. You can follow Ben and I on Twitter at Ben Remington, at Giles Farrell. The podcast has a Twitter at GATG Wild Podcast. Please subscribe on whatever platform you listen to the podcast on, and if you are on iTunes, please leave us a rating. It does help us out. And then also check out zonecoverage.com for our written content, and all the podcasts are there as well. So for Tony and Ben, this is Giles signing off, and we will talk to you again next week.
Later.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Gill and the Goaltender podcast.
That's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.